Hey, Sales Enablement Podcast listeners. This is Alastair Woolcock, co-host of the RevOps Podcast. We have another special episode for you coming right up. So if you like what you hear, come and subscribe and join us at the RevOps Podcast. Hello, everyone. I'm Alastair Woolcock, Chief Strategy and Revenue Officer here at Revenue.io. Our Brown is out today solving the problems of revenue science for many people around the world, but I'm delighted to have with us Todd Kane, the president of Evolved Management. Todd, you've had a fantastic career and run for, well, let's just say a couple decades now. And, working at national telecommunications companies, you've worked in the service integrator space, in the managed services field as well. You've seen a lot in terms of your background and interaction with, companies that have been in the oil and gas sector, manufacturing sector, finance, all across. And I know you're very big in terms of some of the data analysis and how that is used to drive decision-making, which of course is very germane to now this new future and where we are for many companies in the RevOps world, right? How do I use data to inform a decision? And then a decision that right now, for many companies, is, how do I not just predict what's going to happen with my revenue for tomorrow, but how do I stabilize what I have and really emphasize and know exactly where I need to go as an organization? So welcome to our RevOps podcast, Todd. We're thrilled to have you with us.
Awesome to be here. Thanks, Alastair.
So Todd, when you think of it's a common theme we're all seeing right now. You only need to check out every single headline every day. There's a lot of rationalization going on in the market, bar none, right? From, Goldman Sachs just did a big layoff the other day. We saw, everybody knows what's going on in the tech sector. You're seeing companies taking advantage of right-sizing overall. But one of the keys in RevOps is to support decision-making. What should people focus on right now? Like, how do you approach that as an enterprise and go and say, all right, improve what we were doing and make it a lot better than what we were doing 6 months ago because the world shifted a lot?
Right. Absolutely. No, I love data. I worked in this organization where the owner was also a bit of a data junkie, and we literally had dashboards that sat over top of each of the departments so that as we walked the floor, kind of checking things out and chatting with people, you could just glance up and all the data was exposed and everyone could walk by and see how that department was doing on the daily and the weekly. So that was a great experience in just understanding on an hour by hour, day by day basis, how data can inform both the activity of the people working in those groups, but also where and when management can get involved. And I think, management, even certainly from a sales side, they need to protect their energy and make sure that they're spending time in the appropriate places with the appropriate people on the appropriate things. And what I love about data is I think how it's often misunderstood or misapplied. Like, a lot of people tend to think that data is there to provide answers for you. And that's somewhat true, but I think the better power of data is actually helping you to ask better questions. All right. So you can be informed by what is the data that I'm seeing? How is that align with an expectation of what I think I should see? And that provides you the opportunity to do what I call managing by exception, right? So there's a band that I expect that this number should sit in. And when it's inside or outside of that number, what does that tell me? What do I have as some type of gut sense or an informed idea of what that's telling me? Who should I go speak to and ask more questions to dig in a little deeper? So it's this managerial detective hat that you put on and start to ask a bunch of questions and determine, do I think what's happening here is what's happening? And if so, who do I sort of work with, apply some energy, provide some support to in order to make sure that group is on track, right? And it's much better to do this in a proactive fashion. And the other part that I think people get wrong with utilizing data is focusing too much on lag measures, right? So how did we do last quarter is instructive as to whether or not you met goal. But if you say, how did we do this week with a lead measure, and what does that tell me as a prediction for how we're actually going to end up through the course of the week? therefore through the course of the month, and then to the quarter. So it's a lot easier to align to your goals if you're focusing on them as you go, rather than trying to reflect on them in the past and saying, what went wrong, right? Well, it's kind of too late to change that. So that's some of my initial thoughts of how data is incredibly useful in any capacity for any group, regardless of where they work in the business.
So I'm with you, but I also want to lay out the challenge I think a lot of our audience deals with. And certainly when I was at Gartner, we encountered often when we say, hey, you should use data to drive actionable insights, right? This is ultimately what it should do. But when you look at actually how people do it, 76% of all people use data to track against goals. Now, that's not terrible. You're going to say, I had a goal to do X. How am I doing? That's fantastic, right? Like, okay, at least I know. I can track and see what I did yesterday. That's what that does. What's interesting is even that level, 42% of people say, I'm actually only kind of satisfied with the data I'm getting off of that. So less than half of that 3/4 are saying, hey, it's actually helping me in a demonstrable way. And then you look at the next piece and go, where you were kind of going is, hey, you got to analyze the past also to understand the future. You sit there and go, another about 51% of people say, hey, look, I really would like to use actionable intelligence to actually compare past performance with current performance, so I can see what deltas are and start to see where I'm going. Okay, good. That's a decent step, but only 38% are satisfied with that data. And then you sit there and go and say, okay, the final piece, which is, hey, how do you actually help me make a forward-looking decision? Like, are you actually supporting what's going tomorrow? Because a lot of leadership and management often takes all of the data and the dashboards, go, okay, that's really interesting, but here's what I think we should do. And the data scientists say, well, hold on, like it just showed you everything, and you're now just making this decision. Okay, so that right there, of that, the confidence people have of that is around 41%, actually higher than I would think. But it is, in terms of the importance of that happening in an organization, using data to drive a decision, only happens 13% of the time. So effectively, most data is used to simply go, tell me how I did yesterday, and then let the whippings continue around the process to make sure the process delivers for us. But look, we're sitting in a world right now where, yesterday's performance is very different from today's market. So how do you take the data? And you lived in a lot of the ops world. How would you, as an operator of the data, actually get into making an actionable insight to support a forward-looking decision? Like, what? Any tips or tricks there?
Well, I think part of I suppose the trick, and I think what you're alluding to, is that there's the subjective and objective sort of situation that a leader will focus on this. And I think depending on sort of the behavioral profile of a particular person, they will feel more comfortable to leverage on their gut and their experience and what they think is correct, regardless of what the data is telling them. And there are other people that will lean more exclusively on the data, and feelings are not as particularly interesting to them. So like there's definitely a condition as to whether or not one side of the subjective and the objective is influential, right, to whoever that leader is, and whether or not that aligns with the rest of the team. So as with most things, it depends, right? And I think there's always going to be a lever of the subjectiveness and whether or not you feel that the past performance is indicative of what will happen in the future, right? So there's always this dance or this marriage between that subjective and objective data. And that's why I say, I come from a history also way back of ERP implementations. I was a systems implementer for an ERP integrator for SAP. And what I often saw for people that were rolling out SAPs as an ERP was that people and the executives tend to focus too much on the reporting, and that was basically gospel as to what was happening inside the organization. And that's not really that helpful. Like it should be used as a learning function, and it's levered for being informative, but there's still the subjectiveness of what do I think personally about what I'm reading? What am I hearing from my team and from my leaders? And all of those things need to be factored in. And do you weight one thing versus another? Does it change from circumstance to circumstance? I think it absolutely does. And to one of your earlier questions is, what's changing given the environment, and questioning what the future looks like through current economy. The economy is acting in a certain way, and there are lots of conflicting metrics about what the future actually will start to play out as. One of the things from a sales perspective I tend to tell people around this is that it's much easier to increase share of wallet and draw a larger revenue capture from your existing client base than it is to find net new clients. So I spend a lot of time in the managed service industry, and organizations that are looking to grow, they want to add additional top line revenue. That's great. Like, you want to grow as an organization, but if you have high churn, low efficiency, and it takes you 3 to 6 months to capture a new client versus going to an existing client, adjusting their contract to whatever their current situation is because you haven't looked at it in 8 months, or you sit down, discuss with them about their future plans, you sell them a project or some additional services, that takes a couple of weeks maybe to close that sale versus the hunting of looking for additional top line revenue. So I think there's all these ways to kind of think about this, about what is our strategy? What does the data tell us? I'm not going to treat that as literal, but I need it to be a factor that we contribute to our sort of consensus model of what is important to us. What do we think is happening? What does the data tell us? How much do we want to put weight into that? And therefore, what is our strategy?
I am fortunate, as I tend to interact with a lot of ops leaders and senior leaders, execs, and things like that through my journey from this last many years. I'll tell you, there's a consistent theme you always see when you get into this particular conversation on data. And all your points are bang on, but they're often, again, difficult for people to pull together. And the first one goes into the standardization of the tools, the reporting, and the data itself. That's hardly a revolutionary statement. It's hardly a provocative statement. But if I need to understand the remaining total value of contracted business, when it's predicted to churn or renew, and I want to proactively create actions around that to either renew or create upsell, cross-sell opportunities, which is what you're laying out there, you often find that, well, finance knows one thing, customer success is watching another number, sales often isn't even tracking that number, depending on the compensation structures and what they're required to do. And so you immediately have, a disconnect within the silos of the business, right? So first step for anybody in this world is the standardization is critical. And again, that's not new, but it is quite hard to do. What tends to happen when people solve for that, though, is they go buy a tool, right? They're going to go buy a tool to actually drive the standardization of all their other tools. And that leads into issue number 2 that happens all of the time. And we ran into this, Gardner, left, right, and center when I was there. You would sit there and go, there's shadow analytics. So what happens there is tools start replicating data sets off, and you got your CRM system or your ERP system, and there's a tooling running across that. You're pulling off shadow analytics. You're not now getting the real-time insights. So now you have people doing bespoke work on that data because they kind of think they know their area, but you start getting disconnects in the business. And the moment you have that, you have a confidence issue around the data and due to the shadow analytics going on. And then number 3, which is, you said this and it's worth everybody hearing again, most of then, if we've solved 1 and 2, right? So I've put in consistency of tooling. I've stopped shadow analytics. What comes with that? The big G word. What's the G word? Governance. Governance is good, but when you actually get into the regional-based leadership, so you move down out of the C-suite, you move down to functional where rubber's hitting the road, most of that leadership says, well, it's kind of okay, Todd, but it doesn't really adapt to my region. It doesn't adapt to the environment that my team's dealing with in this way. So it's like, I'm good. I'm kind of glad the company knows the big picture, but the picture I deal with every day is slightly different. And so how can you adapt that set into what I need functionally day to day? And those are kind of the big 3 buckets of things that most ops people and leaders I chat with, they go, I struggle with that. Like I need the consistency. I don't want shadow analytics. I need to regionally contextualize, but it's hard. It's difficult, right? It's without just kind of jamming everything into there, putting a governance process is too restrictive in. How do we deal with that? Thoughts?
I think it is difficult. I think there's also a necessity for not shadow analytics as in like I'm pulling from completely different sources, or I'm using a different tool that uses a completely separated database, for example. But it's such a double-edged sword, right? Because like, for example, I know a lot of organizations that start experimenting a lot with Power BI. And it's usable enough that kind of anybody can get into it. They'll pull a data set from wherever that came from and start to manipulate that data. And then they, again, start to trust the insights that data set and that reporting is telling them, maybe a little too much. And then you end up in this conflict where, they're saying, we expect this to be the case in the future. Therefore, we don't expect that there's a need for a hire, when a line manager is saying like, we're flooded, everyone's at 90%. I don't think this is a really good play. We need more people, right? So if there's a conflict in what we see as the data based on that individual reporting, then that is definitely an issue. But that's not necessarily a problem of the data. I think there's some alignment that has to happen around what the insights are, and being able to use that as basically like a use case or some type of communication vehicle around this is what I'm reading, therefore my decision is X, right? So if you're using it in an instructive fashion and trying to sort of sell that case to somebody else as to what you're trying to position, then at least it can be in context, right? But it has to be, that's why it can't be shadow based, right? There needs to be transparency around how are you modeling this? What is the decision making that you're doing? Because I'm sure we can all agree that probably the most used and to some extent the most powerful intelligence tool that we have out there, unfortunately, is Excel, right? Because people will just take whatever data set, dump it into Excel and start manipulating it and building their own tables, building their own sort of array-based databases, right? So things always end up in Excel somehow, right?
Yeah.
And that's fine, because people, I think, want to tinker with some things, and if they want a system that provides them some level of flexibility around how they want to see, interpret, or model the data that may not be available in the tool set that is default given to them by the organization. But again, we have to roll that back to, okay, that's fine. Your data says X. Like, why do we think that that's true? How does that compare against my model? And what do we think is the case to go forward, right? So I often joke, like, having a meeting without any drama is a meeting not worth having. And I like getting into meetings where there's some level of disagreement, right? Otherwise, why are we here? If we all agree, there's no decision to make, right? Just send me an email, let me know what the decision is. So you want to get into those meetings and say, here's what I think based on X, therefore the strategy is Y. And then you have a bit of debate about it, right? Like, I don't think that's true. Market conditions suggest X. So I think we should actually pivot, go this direction. Those are the types of discussions that you want to have. Again, the data is there to ask better questions, not to give you a default or directive answer, right?
Yeah, it absolutely is. Yeah, it's to support and in service of.
Yeah.
But always cautioning that humans are actually quite terrible at digesting multiple points of data, right? So you think of inductive versus deductive. Most people are pretty good at inductive, but they're pretty darn terrible at deductive. So when you look at you're trying to combine a macro with micro-based data decisions, it often behooves companies to have, that's where use analytics, revenue intelligence engines, things like that can come in to help you sift through the noise, because decision bias of the nearness of what's going on in a business often leads people to a wrong decision.
Also, I think to build on that is what people weight as being important in a data set, right? Like having those common values of what do we think is a practical point of data that is instructive, right? So it does come back a bit to goals. Like, what is our outcome? Are we trying to increase EBITDA, or are we trying to increase top line? Well, the decisions around those are quite different.
Yeah.
And the data set and what you're concerned with as the data points in between are different, right? So like there needs to be that commonality of what is our outcome, and therefore what do the models sort of predict for us, right? Because certain individuals will naturally weight certain decisions or certain directions based on what they favor in a data set or in a model, right?
And HCE is a really interesting number. So human capital efficiency numbers. Because you're right, if I want to improve my EBITDA, I'd also improve my top line. Those somewhat are incongruent with each other, but not always. So what tends to happen, so he says, I want to grow the top line, so they invest, hire, S&M functions and different things like that. Often is where you're going to see the costs come in, or maybe it's capacity for delivery, or things like that, right? So you're doing a little bit of hiring ahead of the curve because you know what's coming. Well, that naturally is going to chew up some EBITDA. We're generally okay. We understand that, but if you don't see an improvement in the HCE number, you're adding actually overhead that isn't correlating to improving the bottom line performance, right? So I may actually go, well, they're working, aren't they? Look, the revenue is growing. Yes, but if the HCE number isn't also improving, we know we've added more cost relative to the revenue we're getting, and that is pulling down the previous HCE number we benchmarked against. So that's like a classic way of just looking at it and saying, hey, hold on, I have confidence around my investment or I don't. And it allows you to see what's going on a little bit more. So it's just a way of using things that seem like they're not linked, but there's an equation you can use to simply say, well, I actually can link them together. The other example I'll just give to our audience, because they tend to be, a lot of our listeners, Todd, are in the go-to-market organizations, RevOps and sales ops, a few things like that. A lot of times you go, how do I know my sales team is being effective, right? Well, people, did they sell enough, right? Okay, it's not actually quite that simple, again, because we're talking leading and lagging indicators here. So if you want to understand sales effectiveness, there's a simple equation you do. You take your value of sales converted and simply divide it by the value of sales in pipeline. Right? And if you do that, you get a sales effectiveness number. So then it goes, well, how do I then get the two categories, right? So you have conversion metrics and you have sales pipeline metrics. So a conversion metric, you're leading and lagging. So a leading conversion metric would be something like lead to opportunity conversion rate. That's a good leading conversion metric. And a lagging conversion metric would be, what's my opportunity to win conversion rate on there as well, right? So I lead, and then I had opportunity. And then I might add renewal rate, and I may sit at things and go and say other things like, I could look at it by stage as well. So those are just conversion metrics you're using by pipeline stage and outcome. Okay, so we have numbers associated with those things in the business. I'm going to look at those, add them together, come up with a weighting, and I got a number out of that. Then on my pipeline side, because my pipeline helps me compare against what I have versus what I think I'm going to have. So now when I divide by my pipeline, now I'm looking going, well, classic pipeline leading metric, how many new contacts and prospects am I putting into my pipeline? Now you can't just go take Zoom info and Dun & Bradstreet, dump it in and go, wow, our pipeline's huge. Look, I added a bunch of people. Of course not. You have to look at that then, the lead generated by volume and source. Okay, so again, leading. Then we need a lagging to go with it. So what's the value of the pipeline by my headcount? And how many number of new accounts am I adding by headcount correlating the two? Okay, leading and lagging pipeline metrics. So we then look at those and then we take them and I have my two numbers, value of sales converted, value of sales in pipeline, divide. That's my sales effectiveness score. That's a data problem. That is an ops problem. That is something you can look at any business today and go and say, conversion metrics, sales pipeline metrics, what are we using? What's my leading and lagging, each category, and divide the two, come up with a weighting system to divide it. And I go, that may sound rather complex as I just natter it all out here in 2 minutes, but it's not. Anybody that's in this, they're tracking a lot of these things today. It's just using them and weighting them together and understanding how to create the divisions associated with that gives you a numerical output, and I can benchmark. Once I benchmark, the benchmark is what the executive team can use to say, is this working or not? And it's okay if it's not. Wouldn't you like to know if it's not? And know before your competition, if you can know something isn't working a quarter before your competitor, that's a big deal. Right? It's not always looking for the justification. This is often looking for the failure as fast as the justification of success.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Like, I have a sort of a statement and then a question. This is something I'm kind of fascinated by, and I'd love your input on this. Is efficiency and effectiveness are not the same thing, and they're often conflated. And I think that's a really important insight for people that are modeling this stuff and trying to figure out how well utilized is the team that I have. My question is, there's a sort of a lot of talk about 4-day weeks and how you maximize the efforts of the team. And for me, like I know the rudimentary stuff about sales. I've been involved and sort of been around sales, but it's never really been sort of the strong suit of my career. But I know enough about it to be dangerous. And I've always suggested to owners, especially kind of on the mid-size and small business, that activity precedes results. If you get results, I'm going to be less interested in what your activities are because the results are there. If your results are not there, I'm a little more curious about your activity. And that's not necessarily because I don't trust you, but it's what you suggested, that, well, maybe the messaging is wrong, right? Like if everyone's failing to sort of get the sale and cross the line, maybe that's our fault, not yours, right? And I think that's an important distinction of sort of how you manage that team and how you're trying to drive results is being analytical enough to understand whether or not it's a people or a process problem in some circumstances. And part of what I'm curious about is, like, if people are 100% effective in meeting their targets, hitting their goals, should sales managers care about how long it takes them to do that? So do I care, the sort of from a traditional team management standpoint, that Bob put in 6 hours today, he's put in 35 hours this week, and all is well? From a service standpoint, these types of utilization metrics are often important, but I don't see that as practical in a lot of circumstances. That if you get your work done in a day and then you're at the beach the rest of the week, maybe I don't care. Do you have an opinion on that?
So effectiveness definitely trumps utilization, for sure, right? Or efficiency, as you said. But if somebody is effective in a period of time and it took them a day, but if that began to change, so the delta against the change, I want to know, right? Because it's often that goes into this, again, a leading indicator opportunity for us to go and say, well, is that person remaining as effective? Like if they're all day long able to drive the result you're required and do it in a day a week, would be an extreme, but let's just say that.
Exactly. Yeah, it's an extreme example, but on purpose. Yeah.
Now, we're having a data discussion here, though, but I have to back out of that from a data point to an extent, right? As you've asked me, would I accept it? I wouldn't accept it in an organization. No, of course not. Because the causality and the interpretation that everyone else has around that individual that's now at the beach 4 days is very different, right? They're not going to sit there and go, well, look, they knocked it out another 150% quarter and they're always hitting it. So yeah, they can do what they want. No, there is a team dynamic you always need to be cognizant of in a business. And there is people largely wanting to work and build with each other in their careers and what it is. And that is a qualitative component to a business that must go with the quantitative of the data. And look, I'm big on quantifiable fact and insight. I love it, but you cannot ignore qualitative with quantitative.
Yep.
And what a lot of people want to justify is, well, as long as you get your work done, go do whatever you want. Is that really the case, though? Like that's a disingenuous commentary, I would suggest, for most organizations, because the qualitative impact of that on the business to everyone else is bad. Now, the counter argument would be yes, but we're motivating everybody to do even more, and they could go live the same lifestyle as Jill, who's capable of doing that. But that isn't true either, right? Most people are not actually trying to get to 150% in their job. Most people rise to about 70 to 80% efficiency in their job in any particular area, not just sales, any area.
Yep.
So you're trying to model a business that is actually capable of delivering the result at 70 to 80%, and therefore, what do I need to do, right? How do I keep the qualitative with the quantitative measures going on? So I'm not one that's quite ready to head off to the simplistic idea that just get your job done and do whatever you want, because it's too self-centered, it's too individualistic. If you are bought enough into the concept and who you're working with and the company you're part of to want to put in and be around it, I don't really care how good you are at it, you probably shouldn't be there.
Right.
And I know that sounds pretty harsh, but I don't see a scenario where I could have Rockstar A, and I'm using the name Jill, just making it up, that is able to do all their work in a day, then take 4 days off. I'm like, if you do that and not want to be the part of the rest of it, I'd rather have somebody that's 100% capacity and efficiency, but wants to be in the business, helping the business every day and helping their colleagues in that journey as well. So that's my view on it, right or wrong.
Yeah. So I think you said like wanted to back out from the data standpoint, but like it ended up wrapping back exactly where it was, where it's a measure of the qualitative and the quantitative is still important. It's objective and subjective, right? Like I don't feel that this is appropriate, and the team there's a visible and tangible impact there, regardless of what the data tells me, right? So again, it informs these things, but they're not to be taken literally as this is great. You can't argue with the data, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Absolutely. And you want people that use data to help improve the output of the business, help improve their personal performance, help improve what else we're all doing. We all use data in our lives every single day. My phone tells me that I'm on it too much or I'm not on it enough. Probably, Apple would say not on it enough, right? In the weekly reports and output that we all get pushed to us, right? That's a thing. There's fitness applications that do all of these things. But true, I can go do a huge workout tonight. I go work out 6 hours tonight, and I hit my number that I want to hit for the week of output. But you know what? We also know that if I'm not daily actually breaking that down and contributing, I'm not actually going to have success, right? So it is the application of the day-to-day that goes with all of these things that is so key.
Yep.
And when I think of the world of sales, Todd, and I think of, again, back to the ops and the things they're struggling with, I would just suggest to people, if traditionally we've used ops data to push to people, right? So we've provided operational support value through insights or heroics, right? So somebody came and said, Todd, can you give me a data model for X? Could you tell me what's going on and why? I call that value-based heroics of ops. And if it's, if the focus then is also on driving adoption of the dashboards we built, right? Maybe it might be okay. There's a time and place for that, but that's just an adoption thing. And so when you're doing this, I call that it's an inside out approach, right? It's ops trying to push out to the world. Here's insights we have of what they need versus where the world is today. And in these market conditions, I would say you need to do the inverse of that, be outside in. So think of the interactions that we are having that create revenue. So that's often the customer interaction, right? In some way. How am I taking that interaction and that process and then saying, okay, based upon the interactions, what does my sales team, what do my ops team, what does everybody actually need to do? What's the data telling us that we should be doing next? So we're starting with the customer, but then driving into, hey, let's inform people around actions we can take. And then this is creating a customer-driven ops organization that is really trying to take and realize the value from data in near real time. It is really trying to drive improvement of data literacy relative to the step a customer needs to take. And it is helping support the people that are on the front line of that, whether they're in ops, whether they're in a cross-sell, upsell function, a CS function, a sales function, any of those things, and saying, hey, what's the challenge we think the customer is about to encounter before they encounter it?
Yep.
And just think of that experience as a buyer. You now are getting proactively led on a journey, proactively supported on that.
Yep.
And Todd, final word for you on this. I think of discussions you and I actually have been in our careers where we, over the years, jointly at times, where you would say, all right, how can we actually support and take that outside-in approach of an interaction and now take the insight and support that from an ops, that engagement to a proactive measure, right? Proactive management, proactive insight.
Yep.
That is ultimately where the nirvana is. And that's where teams go, I can't get enough of my ops team.
Yep.
Get to helping them see what to do tomorrow.
Right. And I think that's I love that because it comes back to exactly what I said about the hour by hour, day by day lead measures are going to give you much more actionable and insightful data. And I think what I sense you're touching on is novel data in a lot of circumstances, right? Because we've all been in those interactions, mostly customer service and certainly in sales, where you can actively tell that someone is just working through the script and going through to the next best action based on a script that was written, say, 3 years ago. And every rep is following the exact same procedure because someone determined that this was the one that provided maximum value to the organization. And I think there was a time and a place for that, but I think we're in a world where rather than that plan being developed and built based on a model that is now sort of antiquated, and we're now moving into a place where there is novel data available that can be pushed, and it's not even something that was on someone's radar. So they're in an interaction with a client, they're trying to sell them on a particular direction or a particular product. And the system is able to recognize the status of the interaction, potentially sort of verbal cues available to them, or any type of other action on the client end. And those insights could provide a push to a rep, or either customer service rep, could be a service side, certainly on the RevOps side makes sense as well. But the novel insights that we can get from that machine learning protocol, I think is an absolute game changer, because then it actually creates a more human connection, right? And that's what I largely hate about those scripted interactions is like, I could say anything to you and like, you're just going to go to the next point on this script. You're not hearing me. I don't feel a sense of personal connection. Whereas if we get those more novel insights, then we're really sort of hitting to the bone of what that person needs, what they're saying, and creating more human connection. And people buy from people. Like that's one of the strongest and sort of earliest adages that I always understood in the sales side of things. And if you can make that interaction more human, I think that everyone will benefit from that, client as well as the sales rep.
I think you just summarized perfectly Howard's point of view on revenue science and the importance of real time there. So I agree with you wholeheartedly, Todd. Look, it has been wonderful. I could go on all day with you, but unfortunately we're out of time. Hopefully we'll see you again on here. And I would encourage any of our audience members to reach out to Todd. He's one of the strongest ops people I know. Great mind in terms of some of the go-to-market strategies as well. Todd, fantastic to have you with us. How does everybody get a hold of you as well?
You can go to find me on LinkedIn, Todd Kane, or easiest link just to remember or type in is itisabusiness.com. Tend to focus more on the IT side of the house, but it's just a quick, simple URL. You can find me there.
IT is a business. I love it. Thank you so much, Todd.
Thanks, Alastair.
And please remember to like and subscribe our podcast as always. And feel free to phone in with questions. You can reach us at 323-540-4777. That's 323-540-4777. Todd, thanks again. Wonderful. And everyone have a great day.